All right, we're gonna record and see how it goes in this format.
Wait, you ask for consent too?
No, we're just no consent on it, I guess. Hopefully that's all right. But do speak up. Okay, can you record this? Is that?
Yes.
Oh, I feel like I pressured you.
Can we consent at the end? Like, let's just see where this goes.
Yeah,
We actually can edit this. If there's like, okay, sensitive story was shared, was, I don't know.
yeah, we can absolutely at the end be like, okay.
Very
Not
vague.
posting.
Yeah, make up a lot of fake names.
Yeah, that's great. And yeah, like I said, if you were like, no, that got too sensitive, that's totally fine to not share, or I can cut it out in post, which is one of my so skills.
Yeah.
Okay, let me get out of the way.
Thanks, Ron.
Yeah.
Thanks for.
All right. Hello, everyone. My name is Marty Haught. I am facilitating this panel tonight, and we'll introduce our panelists in just a moment. I wanted to dive in really briefly on sort of the idea on this panel and kind of sort of where we're going with it. So when we were kind of brainstorming what we wanted to talk about, the sort of group that organizes this, we discussed, like, what if we talked about what it's like to be an early engineer? An early engineer is like, what does that mean even? We sort of put it at engineer number 2 to number 5, but actually that isn't even significant because you could be engineer number 10 or so and still be in the same boat. We said non-engineer number 1 because usually that's the technical co-founder, and we wanted to focus sort of what we discussed tonight on if you're not the technical co-founder, not the one leading that, you're sort of coming in as a supporting role or whatever you're asked to do, and sort of like look at that experience with our panelists through that lens. So that is sort of the idea behind the theme of tonight's panel. So let's get to our panelists. We have 4 of them, although one, Elnaz, is joining us from Zoom land, but we'll start here with Bekki. And please introduce yourself to our group and maybe give a brief summary of sort of your startup experience.
Okay. Nice to see you all. My name is Bekki. I'm a CTO, fractional CTO at several startups right now. My startup experience started probably in anger in about 5 years ago, that I've been doing a lot of leading at startups. And before that, I had a role in consultancies and managing at big companies. So I have a breadth of experience, but I do love startups, and I love being the technical co-founder of startups. So I hope that I can give you some tips on what my engineer hires have to do and how their experience is.
Well, I'm Chase. I've been at several different startups, but I ran my own company out of school, and then eventually ended up at Google. Was unassigned at Google, like just like Silicon Valley TV show. Sat around for a year, did nothing, and then yeah, and then jumped and then took a huge pay cut to go work with a bunch of people building software for drones, with duct tape and everything, just trying to get it to work. And then I was the second engineer there, aside from the founders. And was there for a while, but then eventually went to Aurora Solar, which is a solar software company, like the 20th person there, but it was also bootstrapped up to that point, and there was a bunch of interns. So a similar story where it kind of grew really rapidly from that point forward, and you had to wear many hats. And then since then, still doing a little bit of fractional work, but also looking for like maybe the next staff or principal role. Not really sure at this point.
Cool. Casey, currently head of engineering for a company called Blue here in Boulder. Prior to that, I've always been starting companies and varying levels of success with them. But literally been in startups in every space. Moved to Boulder to start a startup with 4 friends that I met in Silicon Valley, that whole Bay Area, working on government contracting software, which is every bit as sexy as it sounds. It's great. We even got funding somehow for that one. I don't know how that cash was cheap then. So we've done that. I've been in like literally the healthcare space. I was working for a company that invented, if you've heard the term gamification, I went to conferences for 4 or 5 years trying to explain that term to people. And now it's like kind of a verb, like everyone knows what it is. So we were very early. We were supposed to be $1 billion company. That didn't work out because I did not drive here in a McLaren. So fortunately that one didn't work out. So lots of experiences. I can't wait to unpack some things, have a therapy session in front of all of them.
Everyone has the sound coming through.
See, it's okay for us, but let's see.
Okay.
Let's go through mine. Can we turn this?
It's not that speaker.
No,
It's not-
I tested it. It wasn't as loud as you would hope.
Let's try
I'm
it.
I think it
pretty good at projecting, but trying not to yell in case that's gonna.
You're good. You're good. I think.
See if that. Okay, go ahead.
Hello? Can you hear me now? Okay. Oh, now you guys are muted, I believe.
Okay, how's that? Actually, we liked my microphone better.
It's hard to do both.
It's been like 4 years since the pandemic, I'm still figuring this out. This is great.
Okay. Utah.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
This is a metaphor for being an early engineer at a startup right here.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm gonna assume the lip syncing means I should go ahead and talk, and then we will rotate between who's got the mic. So hi everyone, my name is Elnaz. I've been given feedback that I can be intimidating, but now that I'm a giant face on a screen, I have no idea why that anyone could ever think that. So yeah, just briefly here, I've been an early engineer in about 2 places that I think are really, I'm gonna draw from. One was at Lob, where I joined as the 3rd engineer, and the whole company was around 10 people, and I got to meet every single person as part of the interview loop, and then saw that company grow to 60 before I left, and the engineering team kind of turned to 12. But my next experience at Alto Pharmacy was probably the most dramatic one. Joined there also as a 3rd software engineer, but by the time I left 7 years later, the company was over 1,000 people, located in a dozen locations in the US. And I, at that point, I transitioned to the dark side of being an engineering manager and an executive in general at the company. So I've seen kind of the full gamut between those 2 experiences, and excited to talk about this topic.
Okay, let's try it. Is my mic better now, or does it still sound weird?
Yeah, how do we sound? Okay. Well,
You're better now, I guess.
okay, let's go with that, because we're gonna have to constantly unmute. Okay, so thank you all. Thank you for those intros. Thank you, Rylan, for the fix. So the first prompt we have here is what to expect in your role as early engineer. So maybe Casey, we'll start with you.
It depends. Like I said, moved here to start a company with 4 people, so I guess I wasn't kind of a founding engineer, but I also walked in as like engineer number 3 or 4 for a company out in San Francisco. I did not expect that there was going to be 20 engineers in a room and with a BlackBerry in the middle, because this is before iPhones. So BlackBerry was a phone, it had a keyboard on it. It was in the middle of the room, and that was how my stand-ups went every day. They did not know how to deal with like a remote employee. They didn't have processes set up or anything. So just, I would say, expect chaos, expect to just roll with every single punch. Also just expect that there's a lot of opportunity there to make things better. That's why I always like really early stage companies, is because you have an outsized impact compared to a larger company where they're like, just do your job, stay in your lane. So that's why I liked it. I don't know, chaos would be my 1-word thing for sure. I don't know if that's helpful or not.
Yeah, so at Aurora Solar, like I said, I joined as a 20th employee. They already had some stuff going, so it was really engineering focused, but it was kind of across the board. But I joined the boys more interesting. When I met those guys, the founders, they just invited me and set an interview to camp out with them and fly a bunch of drones, drink a bunch of beer, and camp out, hang out, do whatever, and crash a bunch of drones as well. And that's when I accepted the job. It kind of was like that. We went out like once a week early on, and so we were
I joined as a software engineer, but I was sitting there helping to duct tape drones, cleaning up cow poop from the field sometimes. But eventually also becoming like primary support for people that were actually flying drones with our app, watching them, jumping in as a general support person, running the forums because I set up the forums and Facebook groups sometimes. So just wearing many different hats. And so like I said, support, QA, everything, until eventually they hired enough people for all those roles, and I was just doing more management and software engineering, but it was a lot of different things, including just running the barbecue every Friday, actually. That was on every Friday for a long time. So yeah, it's kind of my experience.
I think wearing many hats is important because you might be on the phone with a customer one day trying to help debug something that they're doing. I would also say you are not going to be given as much handholding. You're going to be expected to like, here's a bug, can you just go figure out and fix it? There's not going to be a huge process. And a lot of people like, okay, I have 3 hours to review your code, no problem. We're going to go through this line by line. Like, no, go fix it, please. Customers are suffering. We need to move fast. And having to do a lot of that on your own, and then maybe review it with your manager at the end, but not necessarily having a lot of time with your lead, with that founding engineer, because that founding engineer is also trying to roadmap, talk to the product developer, get money so that we have more runway, trying to do so many things that it's going to be fairly independent and a lot of initiative. And so I think that goes a lot with the chaos and the wearing many hats. Just whatever problem needs to be solved, be ready to hop in.
If I could add on, I've had time to think a little bit more now. One thing that a startup, depending on the phase of the startup and depending on where you came from, if you came from a larger company where there are defined processes, and I mean, every company's got crazy, like there's crazy in every company. You have to like choose your flavor of crazy, whichever one you want. If you come into a startup organization, a startup lives or dies by how fast they can execute. It's how many could a startup, there's never been a startup that I'm aware of, correct me if I'm wrong, that maybe like nailed the idea the first time. But you need to get as much as you can out there to see what's working, get things out as fast as possible. And so if you're used to like perfecting your code to, that this is going to scale infinitely for 10 million users, like you're taking too much time. A lot of startups do run, like I said, really fast. And so sometimes that pace can be kind of disconcerting for somebody that really loves to craft in engineering and making things perfect. You love to be a craftsman. Doesn't mean write crap, but there are concessions that you have to make for the sake of speed, because that runway, that clock is ticking all the time. And you feel that pressure all the time. So that was one thing I was thinking about. If you come from something where someone else is paying for it, and you've got an established company, a startup, it might be a shock for sure.
Vanessa?
Yeah, a lot of similar things, definitely the speed and the feeling of like you can wear any hat that you want. And so you feel like you have a lot of freedom, but you also have a lot of freedom to work on the wrong thing or do the wrong thing, because there's really not a lot of other people kind of like stopping you or telling you what to do, which for me was a great feeling of like, I'm only limited by my own capabilities, by my own sort of passion, but it can be intimidating in some ways. I think another piece I'll mention is just like interpersonally, you're joining a relatively small team. So any like conflict that comes up, any difference in styles, you can't really run away from that. So at least for me, I found that it was helpful to be comfortable with confrontation. But if you prefer to kind of like avoid some of those conversations, you can't really run and hide very long in an early engineering team. So that's one thing I'll add.
Okay, great. Yeah. All right, well, let's move on to the next prompt then. So I have here is what to look for in a startup. And I think this is in the context of evaluating a startup and determining if this is a place you'd like to join. So, and let's start with you this time.
Yeah, I think it can vary where you are in your sort of development as an engineer. I think one piece that was important for me was joining a startup that had a lot of different technical problems so that I wouldn't feel like I would be bored or limited, that there was always more to learn, because it is a lot of work and you have to move fast. So you ideally want to feel like you're doing different things instead of just cranking the same feature out over and over again. So I think a breadth of technical challenges is helpful. But of course, a lot of it is like, is it a business that I feel can succeed, or if I have conviction that the founders are set up for success, because that can really cut your runway pretty short. So I think it really ultimately just comes down to Do you feel like this place will last a while? And do you feel like you can learn a lot to get through the hard times?
Yeah, well said. The thing I might add is asking how the financials are, how long the runway is, how does the company plan to get its next source of funding? And then one of the questions I like to ask also is, what is the exit strategy? I feel like that's important to make sure the exit strategy aligns with your values. Because if it's, we want to grow and be self-sustaining and live for another 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, and that's what you want, that's awesome. If it's we want to go 3 years and sell, their values are going to be very specific to not necessarily like the best engineered code or the cleanest product. It's going to be like, how fast can we get users and how fast can we get revenue so that we can go find a buyer. And then in 3 years, you may or may not like working for that buyer. So there's a lot to think about in terms of how the company is planning to progress over the next few years. To carry on with the small team, you better love the other people you're working with. And the most important people are the product manager and your engineering leader. If you don't get along with them or you feel like there's any red flags in your personality matches, you're gonna be spending a lot of time with those people. So that's gonna amplify as stress builds. So just people that you can really get along with.
Yeah, I've always kind of gravitated towards founders that are kind of solving they want to disrupt something or they want to solve big problems. And so I've interviewed a lot of different startups, but the ones that have joined have ended up being ones that, you know, their vision is like, we're going to, you know, change the solar industry, or everybody's going to have solar by this year, or everybody's going to be flying drones for construction, you know, or whatever. But that was 2014. And so nobody had drones. So it was always kind of like, I was always more excited about the vision and seeing people that seemed like they were really 100% in, but you know, everything else that's been said is important about the runway and financials. You know, some companies won't disclose those, so I don't think Drone Deploy would ever disclose their financials to their employees, but you know, I was never quite clear how close we were to bankruptcy until we raised more money, right? But but it was okay. It was so fun. It didn't happen. So yeah.
I would say 1000% to the people thing. I got to be part of a startup with 4 people that I worked with before and loved dearly. And there was one guy on the team that I met, and I had like a gut feeling about him initially. And I was like, it's just something, I can't put my finger on it, you know, and I kind of ignored it. Because I'm like, no, I'm gonna move to Boulder. I'm gonna like hang with these guys that I've worked with before. I love this. Like, we'll figure that thing out. And that guy ended up being a thing for us, like 100%. So the more I've learned about the way that our brains work, that gut feeling is literally like your primal brain doesn't have connections to your speech center. So you will feel something like, oh, I can't figure it out. But you literally have no connection. So that gut feeling, I've learned to just always listen to that. I would also say, depending on where you're at in life, I have 2 kids and a wife, and we had a stable life in the Midwest before we, moved here. For me to take a 50% pay cut and a 200% increase in work hours was a real great deal. Also, the cost of living is a little higher here than in the Midwest. And so I think when you're looking to start up, it sometimes isn't all up to what you want. It's maybe what your partner, your family, they have to agree with it too, because they're coming along for the ride. And after 2.5 years at my startup, my wife was like, let's get off this ride. She was ready to get off it. So I think all those things really factor into the choice. There's a ton of great ideas and a ton of great startups out there, but you got to find one that whatever you're optimizing for in your life fits all of those things for sure.
A follow-up question, sort of what Bekki was saying. So in your experience, like, let's say you're saying, hey, what's our runway? How much financials? And they don't answer that, or they do answer that. Does that set off sort of that little like hunch that you can't maybe you could book?
If you're number 2, that would yeah. If you're engineer number 2, that would set off red flags for me. If they're not willing to at least say 12 to 18 months or some, even if it's like a ballpark. If you're employee number 20, yeah, maybe they wouldn't disclose that, but I feel like a startup is a risky proposition. And so if they're not willing to be transparent with you about where they're at and where things are going, I personally would find that to be a red flag.
Yeah, I joined a startup once and I wasn't sure where the funding came from. I wasn't sure how long they were gonna keep funding it. The guy had some ideas, and so me and other team, we were like, let's try building this thing, and 3 months later, he's like, yeah, I don't think this is working. After 3 months, and I'd like quit a totally stable job and go do that thing. So, yeah, I learned that lesson. You can check into that stuff for sure. It worked out.
I think it also is like, depends on your family situation. If you've got people to support, you really would want to ask.
I have the most like forgiving wife in the world, for sure. Like I've drawn her through some stuff. So, yeah, support is helpful for sure.
But also, when I was in Soma in San Francisco, a drug deploy, the risk was a lot lower because if the company disappeared, I don't know how many people have worked there, but there literally were people that just slid resumes under every office door, and they would get hired because everybody's hired. So it was a lot easier. There's a lot more cushion if you were to fail than if you were to, maybe even out here, so you just go everywhere and somebody will hire you then. So. As far as like the financials and stuff, I don't think I did a good job evaluating drug deploy. They didn't share any information, but they were literally duct taping styrofoam together, and they said they're going to change the world, and I was like, I'm sold. But
That works,
and it still exists. Now they're integrated with like Boston Dynamics robots and stuff like that, and so it's a lot cooler. But
Great, it's gonna kill us all. With nothing.
So our next prompt is sort of riffing on that, which is what are some red flags to keep an eye on? And I think the context of this is also like, now you've joined, so you have committed to being part of this team. What should you keep an eye out for, and let's start with Chase.
I was expecting to start.
Okay, we go, Amanda, you wanna go? Yeah.
Sure, yeah. I think the sort of biggest killer for a startup at that stage is sort of around finding the market for your product. And so I think the biggest red flags I usually see is if a founder or an organization feels like, oh, if we just built this one more feature, this one more feature, this one more feature, then we will be able to like go out and sell. And so I usually like to see like, hey, show me how you're already selling. Show me like how you're selling the prototypes before I go build it as an engineer, because you can spend a lot of time building and then months later you realize like, wait, it's been so long since we talked to a customer, or we don't even have the first sense of how to take this thing to market. So I think really just understanding like what the connection to your end customer is, and kind of speaking to the runway and transparency. I feel that as an engineer at that early on, you have it's like a wild amount of influence with the decisions you're making on the business. And so if someone's kind of withholding information about the basics of sort of how much runway you have or how you make money, that really kind of limits my ability as an engineer to make the right technical decisions. That may seem like a leap, but we can talk to that in more detail. But yeah, I generally look for a good sort of exposure to the end customer. Like, are we talking to them? Are we getting their feedback? Do we have a sense for what it takes for them to pay?
Yeah, I would jump on top of that. Like I agree. Like just early on, it's about like just seeing customers using the product or at least being excited about it, even if it's free. And just whatever we're building, like just actually watching people use it and iterating on that, because I've worked with some other companies on the side that they show customers the product. Somebody might say they're excited about it, but nobody actually wants to use it. They don't have any, they come up with features that we should build, we build them, but like there's no customers that actually are excited about those. When we say they are, they have a hunch. But I think that's a really big red flag. I've seen it a couple times, but at both of the big companies I've been at, is they found product market fit pretty early on. So it was always exciting to just build something and see people use it right away. But that's some of the side gigs I've had, like it's much worse. Right.
Bekki, do you want to?
Yeah, for me, one of the biggest red flags I have found is if there is nobody who's product focused in the org. So there's different kinds of founders. There's founders who are the chief salesperson. There are founders who are really technical. There are founders who are very product focused. And if you have a founder who is not product focused and there is no one else in the organization really driving that roadmap and that product vision, I feel like you'll get lost in checkboxes. Like, hey, can you put in this checkbox? Can you solve the problem with this button? Can you do this little thing? And no one's driving that big picture that will actually get you toward the product market fit. It's so easy to get caught up in the daily fire. So if there isn't someone with that really strategic vision helping pull the rest of the team in that direction and saying, don't worry, that bug's not important. We have this huge feature that's going to like make or break this company, then the whole company will get bogged down in the details. And then one tiny red flag, this is a big one to me also, I guess they're all big, but I don't want to drone on. So the other one is shiny objects. So if you are in the hot new tech and your hot new tech needs to be the core of the company, go nuts. I'm not talking about that company. I'm talking about if your company is building a healthcare app and they want to use the latest JavaScript framework because they heard at a party that that was really cool, like that scares me. Because if you're a healthcare tech company, go with a tried and true stack, one that scales, one that's stable, one that's not going to take your company when Angular switches from JavaScript to TypeScript one day while you're asleep. You know, like, I don't know, maybe I'm aging myself. You remember that.
Oh, one switch?
Yes.
RIP Angular.
Yes, exactly. So sticking with the things that work. We don't need to chase the new hotness just because it's hot. And that to me is a big red flag as like a founding engineer.
Kind of dovetailing off that, I think organizational focus, I know I said earlier, you gotta give as many shots on the goal as you can. But if you have like 2 engineers or 3 engineers or 10 engineers even, and the company's like, we're gonna do this and we're gonna do that and we're gonna do this and we're gonna do that. I read a book, it was a short little stupid book, I think it might have been like a kid's book. It's called Rhinoceros Focus. Talked about a rhino that like you can run after something, and if it charges at one thing, it'll hit it. But if you see a rhino try to hit like 3 or 4 targets, it's gonna miss all of them. So organizationally, you can put a lot of firepower behind something. I want like some product person. I love every product owner I've worked with. I've worked with some amazing product owners, product people. I love it when they've got conviction and then they're like, shit, that didn't work. All right, cool. Like you at least you learned, you got data, and then you can like charge towards the next thing. But constantly thrashing or spreading yourself thin, I think tends to be kind of a smell of a company that you're like, oh, this is not going well.
The trick is how do you suss that out during the interview process? And I think that's kind of the hard part because startups are not organized or well documented. So asking the right questions and what are they?
Well, what's an example of the right question? I mean,
That's
certainly one is like, who owns product?
Yeah.
Where's your vision?
Yeah.
Maybe there's a piece here which is like, okay, you've been there for 3 months or 4 or 5 months. And these are the things you're starting to see that like should spook you about like that sort of like chasing all the different things and not focusing on a focused strategy or whatever.
And I would say that if you're an early engineer and you are at a company, let's say you have been in 3 to 4 months and you notice these things, you have the power to speak up and say something. And maybe they fire you and then later on here that company tanks. So not that that's ever happened.
Only if they fired you though.
Yeah, only, right, only. But no, I think you have an outsized influence, as we've been saying a lot. That's one of the benefits of being early, so you can help drive that.
But if it's a small enough company, the product person is just gonna be a CEO, like, because it's just the founders and you and maybe one other person. So it's really difficult to figure out if they're gonna hire those people and they're gonna be good.
And founders are amazing salespeople. They will sell you on their vision. They will sell you on their strategic leadership. So it's a lot of asking the 5 whys, essentially. Keep asking for more and more detail in every answer until you feel satisfied.
And that's anything else you want to add? All right, well, that's great. Oh, yeah.
Break down the 5 whys.
5
I
why.
gotta Google it. I'm not gonna get it exactly right, but it's essentially like you ask a question and they give you an answer and you say, why did you choose X, Y, and Z? They give you an answer. Okay, why did you go that direction? You kind of almost like ask why to every question. And that kind of
5 questions in depth is a good,
Yeah.
It may not actually be literally 5. The idea is you're getting to the root cause.
I got like 4-year-olds sometimes. Like, why is the sky blue? It's the atmosphere. Well, why is that? Because there's gases. And like, why is there gases? I don't know, like, it's how it goes.
Yeah.
It's true, right? It's totally-
I mean,
Yeah.
yes, hopefully the CEO is not just.
All right, so our next prompt is a fairly broad one, which is sort of advice on how to be successful as an early engineer. So maybe Becky, you want to set this one?
Sure. Initiative. That's like my favorite word, is find a problem, solve it. You know, be helpful to the people around you. Don't wait for permission. I'll leave it there. I'll let everyone else.
Yeah, I agree with that. Like everywhere I've already been, I don't feel like I've had a real job description or anybody that's ever told me that I need to do, well, they have a general direction. And it might just be like this thing, in the drone case, drone can't fall in the sky and something like that. And, we just want people to fly and it needs to work. That's it, right? And then you figure it out, and maybe that means even hiring people for your team, or if you have funds, could be like support, or watching people as they fly, catch bugs, live, so that, they don't get angry at you later, or whatever it is, like you just have to pick. Just have initiative is a big one, but,
Yeah, initiative, that's such a good one. Being in leadership now, I try to do this with people that I work with every day, and I ask some engineers to do this, is don't come to me and say like, can I do this? Like, can I do this? Like, what do you think about this? Like, come to me and say like, I intend to do this. Are you okay with it? Like that little shift of like, can I do something versus like, I'm taking ownership, I intend to do this thing. I own this thing. That's really huge, because at a startup, again, you have to wear many hats. There's not going to be maybe a head of QA to catch all the broken stuff. You need to maybe like spend 10 minutes a day and go through your own app. You're like, where's stuff broken? I'm gonna fix that stuff. Yeah, it's gonna happen.
yeah, like I've gone to the CEO before, maybe 1 or 20 30 people, and just been like, I need these 2 people hired, because I had already researched them and did my interviews, whatever. But they don't go through the normal interview process or anything like that. It's just like, you're gonna pay for this if it goes wrong. That's fine. And then we hire those people, and that's, you just need to be able to jump in and say, we need this, and convince the CEO and have a solution, have the people. And, you don't have to do that, but like, it definitely is, what they're looking for with like the early engineers and every members.
Right, and that's,
Yeah, a lot of that resonates. I think an additional piece for me was getting really good at managing up, because oftentimes the folks you're working with are sort of like feeling alone, right? They're founders. They've probably bet their careers, their finances, their relationships on this company, and so it can be hard for them to admit when things aren't working well or ask for help. And so a lot of your role as an engineer often is sort of being able to know when to raise the flag that like, hey, we're going in the wrong direction from an engineering perspective too, or helping them find the way forward. So really being able to put yourself in the founder's shoes and building those relationships, but really just in general, I think these small teams, you're going to break stuff that puts the company at risk because that's how small it is. And so you need friends in those moments to pair with you and unbreak prod, because you will break it on the weekly. Hopefully not, but just really developing that ability to influence folks without a lot of authority. Yeah, and a therapist, definitely recommend that as well. Yeah.
Well said.
I think part of what I was wondering, so, there's stories where you take initiative, but then you're ignoring some feedback from like your internal team. And so like asking, like, I intend to do this, is that cool? Was a good add-on to that, because I think a lot of us can be a little like, all right, I'm gonna do it. And then you wasted 2 weeks of your time, of your company's money. And also I'm wondering if there's like, how do you kind of check yourself and how much initiative, especially if like, I recently had a story where I was like, this guy came in and was like, that's how we're gonna do it. Like, you're like 2 weeks in, like, go.
Don't do that.
Yeah,
Don't do that.
Yeah.
I'll give an example just from this week. So we had a really awkward UI thing where our little information button with the hover pop-up was in a terrible spot. And Weston, who's on the call, was like, hey, can I go fix that? Or I want to go fix that. I'm like, oh yeah, that's been bugging me forever, but I have not had the time or bandwidth to do it. Yes, please go do that. And obviously if he's spending 2 weeks on that, I'm pissed, but it's not a 2 week thing, right? But it's a little thing that's going to make our lives better for our users. So
That goes to managing up,
yeah.
right? It's just like, I mean, I had one of my guys come to me today, he's like, do you care if I delete like literally hundreds of JavaScript files in a repo and thousands upon thousands of lines of code? I'm like, no, we don't use that stuff anymore, get rid of it, that's awesome, but like, if somebody just holds away, like you said, for 2 weeks on something, you're like, what have you been working, like, on some feature, like, that doesn't matter, that's not where the business is going, why'd you waste your time? Then you become angry, so I think it's just initiative, accurate.
Communication, yeah. I don't think you would disappear for 2 weeks, and I think that maybe was an extreme example, but, yeah, I mean, we're obviously communicating more frequently than the ability for someone to disappear for 2 weeks. I hope.
Well, kind of like the gray area of can I, or I'm gonna intend to do this versus pushing too hard.
Well, I mean, eventually you gain enough trust that you might be able to go away for 2 weeks, but yeah, usually that you want more frequent check-ins and maybe MVPs and prototypes and all these things that are gonna prove value beforehand. But if they know that if the CTO at Drone Deploy is amazing and he says he's gonna go for a couple months and build like some new AI system, they just let him do it because they know he can do it, but it takes a while to get there.
All right, I have one more prompt, and I'm kind of questioning this prompt, but we'll ask it anyway, and then we're gonna turn it over to audience questions from there. So my prompt is, when should you move on?
Well, I've been fired everywhere I've been, so. Usually shifts in the management and changing everything and or layoffs or whatever.
Right.
But yeah, it's I have a good record so far.
Okay, when you get told you have to leave the building, right? That's.
At least they pay you.
I had something pop in my head, then St. Louis Fargo, you got something, Brian, you've been cheating, looking.
I know, I've been thinking about.
I like to percolate on it longer. Yeah, so like I said, I was at a company and it's familiar with like Forrester research and Gartner research. They also talk about like hype cycles and the next big companies. And when you're employee 12 at a company and you're told that like you're going to be the next $1 billion unicorn, you know, you kind of like stay forever because you're like, that's going to happen. That kind of gets seated inside you. And then like 7 years in, you're like, I'm really sucking at the job. I'm not motivated. I'm burned out, but I don't want to admit it because I'm going to hang on to this dream that maybe this is going to happen. And then when a friend of yours comes to you and it's just like, you're really bad at your job. Like literally had a friend pull me aside, like, you're not good at this. They're called the Peter principle. You get promoted to your level of incompetence. I was there, right? And I was also burnt out. And it was at that point that I just kind of like had to step back and be like, I'm not serving these people. I built this team to like 30 people, 30 engineers, I should say. And like, I'm not serving any of them right now. I'm not happy. They're not happy. I'm not fulfilled. Let's move the family to Colorado. You know, like that was the thing for me. Is I think you have to check yourself and realize when you're burning out, and that's probably the time to leave.
Yeah, I would say like, even though I was, like I said, I've been laid off, it was more of a favor because I'd spend time with the other principal engineers to come up with a spreadsheet on all the things that we own and the things we need to hand off because everybody's ready to leave, you know, and share that with management, work with them on it. So they're aware that, you know, who's ready to leave and stuff, and eventually, you know, if they are gonna have layoffs, we'll be part of it. But yeah, so in that case, burnout and ready to hand off most of the things, don't want to start new things because it's just gonna be another set of responsibilities, another project.
Yeah.
Inez?
Yeah, there's a bit of a paradox here. I think it goes back to an answer someone gave earlier around like at a startup, things are pretty much going to be on fire all the time. Like you have to really let a lot of fires burn and be comfortable with like a tech debt, comfortable with interpersonal conflict. Things are mostly going to feel like they're not working, even when you end up at $1 billion company and you're amazed that you survived this long. So there is a little bit of like, I think I probably wanted to quit at least every 6 months, if not more often. So I have to say that. And I think, you know, I got some good advice from a friend who was like, yeah, I think about this as like a 6 month at a time. If I decide I'm going to stay for 6 months. I'm not going to question it again. And then I'll revisit at the end of that, because when you're in the thick of it, it's hard to kind of have perspective, but it's helpful to set kind of a cadence for yourself to look back and see if it still makes sense to be there. But I think the other piece is like, if you lose conviction or lose the stamina to really stay there, that's really hard to work through. So I think as long as you feel like there's one more thing you can try or one more thing you can learn, or there's still growth for you, I'm glad I stayed and I didn't quit. But if you're at a point where you don't think the company's going to work anymore, or you don't have a good try left in you, even after a vacation, even after doing things that you love, then it's time to move on.
I felt like sometimes that I could just do the work in my sleep, even though it's a very high level. Maybe it's only taking like 20% effort of me for a week, in a given week, and it just seems like, it's not challenging enough.
Real quick, I know you want to get to yours, it's gonna be really good, but what she said, just like, it triggered something in me. I won't say the company, it may or may not be my current employer, they're not watching, right? There was a point in time a few years ago where I literally was like, I'm gonna quit, my boss was gonna quit, we were like, we're done, like, stuff is messed up right now. And I told myself, I put a calendar appointment for 6 months from the date that we had this conversation, and I was like, I'm gonna go really hard for 6 months. And I'm gonna just try, I'm gonna throw everything at the wall, I don't care if I piss people off, like, I'm gonna make this place better. And that calendar appointment came up 6 months, it was July 4th, it was my wife's birthday, and I was like, I looked at it, I was like, crap, maybe I go, it's a calendar appointment. I have to decide whether to quit or stay at this place right now. And the calendar appointment just said, is it better yet? That's all it said. And we're turning the place around. We're still in the process of it, but like, it got better. It got better. Like, there is hope, but yeah, that 6 months at a time thing, oh my God, that hit for sure.
Yeah, I love that framework of the 6 months. That's awesome.
Yeah.
I don't think I have anything super insightful to add, and especially it's going to be so dependent on every one of you and how your brain works. I think the biggest themes for me are, do I still love it? Do I still believe in the vision? If I'm like stressed and overworked, am I still like fulfilled by that? I feel like I've been burned out at the easiest jobs I've had in the past and burned out at the hardest jobs. And so I don't think it has to do with how hard or easy the job feels. It's like, do you feel fulfilled by whatever stress that job is giving you? And that's going to be very different for every person. And then you should leave when you no longer feel that fulfillment.
Good. That's great.
Sounds good.
Okay, audience, questions? Yes.
Hello,
Hello.
my name's Kyle.
Hi, Kyle.
Hello. Yeah, so at what point in your careers did you decide that, that you were gonna kind of go the startup route, and whether that was early on or not? And then like, what advice would you have for someone that was very early on, maybe like, hypothetically, they had like a year of experience and they were looking at a startup that they would have like kind of maybe significant responsibility in? Like, would you take something like that early on?
Asking for a friend.
Yeah, file.
Did you hear that?
Yeah, I did.
Who wants to take it? Who wants to start?
It's loaded a little bit, so I apologize, but yeah.
And I think it's a great question, right? Yeah.
So
Yeah.
the 2 questions there, right? It was like, when do you know, like, when to like jump into startup land versus just getting a job somewhere, basically, right? And then being like fairly new in the career, like going into a startup, like what should you be looking for, or what?
Maybe like, I think for someone like myself that would have more responsibility than someone at junior usually would, and maybe that level's like imposter syndrome, like how would you deal with that?
That never goes away, man. I'm 42, wrestling it every day.
I think
Do you want to take a first shot?
Yeah, I can at least answer the first part of the question. I think for me, at least, I interviewed in various sizes of company every time, right? Every time I was like, maybe this is now the time to go work at a bigger company that's like more mature and established and all the things that you hear. And every time I just like could not get myself to accept a job like that. There's no dig on that, but I think my advice here is like, don't feel like you have to choose one until you go all the way through the interviews, and then you can kind of like see what feels right for you at the time. And yeah, I've changed my mind on this a lot. I used to think that like coming straight out of college or boot camp or first role in the field shouldn't be in a startup because it is so chaotic and you're not always going to have a lot of patient, friendly people to guide you through things. So there's been times where I'm like, I would never encourage this, but then I've also seen folks jump in and they're, either self-taught or really driven, and they absolutely thrive in a way, and they're able to grow their skills in a way that they would not have been able to do in a larger environment where promotions and growth is much more sort of like metered out to you. So I don't think there's really a right answer here. It's just more, but I think like every time I want to join a startup, I'm basically saying like, I'm willing to throw a lot of things at this. If your job does not feel like something you want to throw a lot at, it's just probably stay away from a startup. It's probably not worth it.
Yeah, and to carry forward with that, I think the amount of industry knowledge you'll learn at a startup in 1 year is going to be much bigger than what you'll learn at 1 year in a big company. But you need to make sure it's an environment where when you make mistakes, when all of us make mistakes every day, that it will not be catastrophic and the people around you will support you and help you fix the mistakes. So you don't want it to be an environment where it's like you're getting blamed and you feel like you're always in trouble for making mistakes as you learn. As an example, so when I worked at Shopify, all of the tooling was there for us. We didn't have to do anything. We had these really great debugging systems, really great logging systems. The build was a different team that I had never met. We were so far removed. And so the junior engineers I worked with at Shopify never once even had to look at a terminal or figure out how to like log into production, into the database and figure out what's going on or tail the logs in production. Never had to figure that kind of stuff out. At a startup, you will, because there's not tooling. And so you'll learn the inner workings of your stack in a way you never would at a big company. So it's going to be harder, but that growth curve will be much steeper.
Yeah, a lot of the people that I worked with at startups that jumped in and they were really driven and motivated. Several years later, they're all running their own companies. Not all of them, but a lot of them are. And so my network's just full of people that started as either right out of college or a little bit later and just killed it at the company, but then they kind of use that as a jumping off point for their own ideas and they already kind of knew how it worked and they figured the rest out as they went. That's kind of the trait that they had already, was just they figured it out and they were willing to jump in to a bunch of unknowns and challenges. But I also want to mention that, if you do go somewhere like at Google, I was at Google for a little bit before I jumped into Drone Deploy. A lot of people don't jump into a startup after that because it's a big take that, like it's a golden handcuffs to Google and they give you refreshes in your stock constantly and they try to keep you there. And you can always go to go/pay and see how much money you're making and how much you're gonna make and how much you're gonna lose. And it's really tough. And so, if you can do it, that's great, because once I had Google on the resume, everybody called me back. But once before that, you wouldn't have the difficulty of letting it go, right?
The big cop-out answer for me is it really depends on who you are. Because if you're talking about nobody even touches the terminal. Like, I don't know how many startups I'm like, the database is failing. This like CentOS box isn't working. Oh, the front end looks like crap. What's up with this design? Like, our SEO is down. Like, all those things could happen in a day, right? So you do learn a lot. At a larger company, if you're not very self-motivated, they're gonna have a track for you to go from engineer 1, 2, 3, 4, senior 1, 2, 3, like you're gonna learn along the way. I see you shaking your head. So you're like, nope, don't want that. But some people, that actually is a really good way to at least get some experience in kind of a more like a track that you can just kind of be on. But if you're motivated and you're like, come hell or high water, I'm gonna figure this thing out. Startups, like you said, they're so good to learn so fast. Like it's like dog years of startup, basically. Like a year at a startup is 7 years of like some corporate gig somewhere for sure. So
I have a follow-up kind of question that I would like the panelists to kind of explore, which is sort of like financial risk and what you're willing to tolerate and how that might be different when you're, say, younger or earlier in your career than when you're later and have a family and whatnot. So I'm just curious, panelists, if you could kind of chime in on that, your perspective.
I need healthcare.
Yeah, it seems like that's the thing that keeps
That's
you
my line.
more often. It seems wrong that that's the one thing that keeps people more often than money.
And that's
Yeah, I personally, I'm sort of conservative on the like emergency cash side of my life, but pretty aggressive on the like startup career bet side of life. So I think you kind of need both. I will say, I think there's been a lot of math done, and almost objectively joining a startup is not the right choice financially. Like, it's just one of those things where, yes, the upside could be much higher, but the risks are higher. And so, like, on average, if you just join a standard job and earn a standard salary, you're probably better off. But that, like, to me, I would be so bored, and I don't think my career would have taken the trajectory it did if it didn't take a risk, but it definitely could have not worked. So I think you kind of have to be a little like me, and a little maybe not right to go in the startup land, but that's at least my rationalization.
I would have made a lot more money staying at Google. And when I looked several years later, I was having beers with the CEO of Drone Deploy, and he was like, I don't know what you were thinking. But like, he was the one that interviewed me, the one that hired me, and one convinced me everything. But like, he was like, I don't know why you joined us, but I'm glad you did. But it was definitely a big cut. And but I have had big upside as well. Like the startup that I joined, that got acquired by Google, on day one, they invested all my stock and gave me cash, and then the Drone Deploys were quite a bit now. I have a lot of equity there. And then the other one that is worth way more, and they had tender offers while we were even a private company. So it's been 100% for me at startups, but that seems rare. But I also kind of feel like it's the founders and the way to run a company, and like giving a tender offer early on to employees is great when like the market's high. So yeah.
Yeah, a startup is a lottery ticket, for sure. Like, maybe they should do the math on like lottery winnings versus startup bidding. Like, I'm curious, should we just start buying lottery tickets? And let's just all go buy them. Regarding finances, I wish somebody had taken like 16, 17, 18-year-old me and been like, start saving money in the 401k now, start investing money now, because compounding is amazing. It took me like way too late in life to really get that. So yeah, if you're going to a nice company and they're doing like 5% 401k match and you can start socking that away, yeah, it's boring, but maybe you end up ahead. That being said, the startups that I've been a part of have been amazing and more valuable to me than any salary. Like, my wife and I live below our means. Again, yay, emergency cash. Let's go with that. Because it allows us the flexibility for me to jump in rather than a startup. I wanted to do that risky thing. Rather than being like, oh, the house payment's this, and I got these like fancy cars and I have all these things. No, it's like, life is more fun when you can kind of be flexible. But what startups have given me that's more valuable, I think, than money is just connections and a network and people. Because at every startup you go to, you're going to meet, 10, 15, however many people, and then they're going to know people, they're going to know people. And I've not interviewed for a job in about 20 years. It's just all been, I know somebody, I know somebody, I know somebody. And that network is hugely valuable.
Yeah, I've had somebody just say, I have a chair here, you come, we'll start giving you money. I can sit down, I'm like, okay, I have some time.
You said Dan has a question.
Dan, yes.
I did want to like follow up on the financial stuff a little bit more, and obviously you can't say how much equity or salary you would expect at a startup, but like, how would you, if you were interested in joining as engineer 2 through 5, how would you go about determining the right amount to like ask for equity or money?
Well, like the first, a couple of years usually get, like, if it's really early on, like, it's gonna be definitely like 0.5 to 1% or 0.1 to 1%, like, it's just standard. I think that a lot of them have that range. And depending on what stage they're at, like, if it's already get close to Series A, like, that's pretty good. But if it's C, like, it could be worse, and it also depends on how much it's gonna get devalued when they raise their Series A, and like, so many, like, it could just disappear immediately if they get it like down right immediately, like right after Series A. So it's hard to say, like, even the day they.
But how would you go about calculating, right? Like,
I think you just need to assume it's just fake money, but, with the potential upside, things go really well, so. Sorry, because like other startups will try to trick you, like, even a little later stage, but they'll give you like a spreadsheet and they drag it out and show you like, okay, if you stay here and we go public, you're gonna get this many millions of dollars. And they're not happening very often, especially with the recent crash.
Sure.
Like, all those companies that gave people those spreadsheets didn't get to do anything. So hard to say, like, even the ones that give you a big, like, guaranteed, like, payout in 4 years, like, it doesn't happen. So you can't trust the startups even less, like.
And I've been a startup before, we've got like bonus compensation structures, like, hey, you guys hit these deliverables, you get bonuses, and the cash got tight a couple times, they're like, what if we give you, so you can choose stock options or cash. And I'm like, this feels like a trick. Like, if I choose the cash, am I fired tomorrow? You know, like, you try to figure out who's really loyal here, what's going on? And I asked around, everybody took the cash. Everybody took the cash because like that's where it didn't work out. And I think people can sense it. So yeah, again, it's another like, it depends. Like, what are you optimizing for? Are you out for a year of adventure on the wild seas and you hope that this hits big? Maybe you want more options, but if you're like, I need to feed my family, I got a mortgage, like, you might try to go for more money. And it's usually negotiable. You can usually kind of use those two against each other.
Yeah, I get another point,
Ines, do you have something you want to add?
Yeah, I think just some basics, like I would make sure the cash covers your expenses and that you're not in a situation where you're pulling from savings. That may seem obvious, but I've seen a lot of folks kind of like assume that they can just live really thin and kind of make up for it later. So make sure the cash can cover your basic life expenses. And then I'll drop a link. There's this really great calculator that kind of shows you like based on what a company is valued, what stage they're on, what the odds of success are, and what sort of like outcome you need for the company for your equity to be worth anything. And what you'll realize is like a lot of companies need to be worth a lot of money for even like your 1% to be able to survive the multiple rounds of funding that you might need to get there. Of course, it's a different climate now than it was a few years ago. But I would say like focus on having enough cash. The equity is very much a lottery ticket and you really cannot negotiate equity between two private companies. It's like apples and oranges. So you just want to make sure you feel like the outcome needed for you to get a payout on the equity side is interesting enough, but mostly just focus on efficient cash.
Yeah, I was gonna mention that my friend it branched off with the drone deployment, another drone company. They probably raised like $50 million by the end. And during this recent downturn, they're gonna have a down round, which looks bad for investors. And so they come in instead and they're like, okay, well, we have a buyer, you can sell to this other company similar to yours, and it'll look good on the books. And they do it, but then, you know, the investors, looks good for the investors, and they have preferred shares, so they get all the money first, but then, you know, and that he makes a lot more now than he ever did, and as the founder of that company with, you know, a good percentage of the company, just as a salesperson somewhere, right? So he didn't make anything out of it, because the investors get preferred shares, they get the first money from the sale, and they get nothing. Most employees get nothing. It happens a lot, especially in a downturn.
And I know this is like a startup animal. There's absolutely nothing right or nothing wrong with finding a more established company than this. Like, you can find good medium-sized companies that are 30 people, 40 people, even, you know, up to 100, 200 people that are kind of startup beat. Like, they got a good vibe. There's some autonomy there, but there's also like an HR department that makes sure you get paychecks on time. And, you know, there's like a little more structure. Those can be really nice too. Again, you can save a lot of money and probably in the end, you might come out ahead.
And you can still have a lot of influence in a company that size, yeah.
Yeah, that's been my sweet spot. That's what I've actually found that at this stage of my life that I really enjoy. It's like 150, 200 person company where you can just have a lot of influence. It's been fun.
And a lot of people never exercise their shares their options that they get from those companies because of the tax impact.
Oh, yeah.
They'll wait too long and then they can't afford it and then they go away because they expired. But, you know, it could cost you, you know, if you hit it big, $1 million that you need to pay right now in taxes and exercise costs before you can get those shares, and you might not be able to sell them for like 5 years. So you need to put down $1 million today, let's say, if you really hit big, and you're not going to sell them for a while.
All right, I think we have time for one more question.
One of the things I've heard about founders, is like successful founders should only have like 10 years of vision, or like they're thinking, I'm gonna be a best company for 10 years, right? And that's gonna be what that commitment's kind of the level that you need to be founder. For engineer 2, 3, 4, is there a similar kind of time horizon in your mind? Or is it kind of down to like 6 months, every 6 months, I'm still here?
In this market, it might be the 6 months.
No.
Yeah.
I don't mean to laugh because that's not fun. I think it's less important to have that 10-year horizon if you're engineer 2, but I think you're still early enough that you need to share in the vision of the company to have that passion to push through the chaos.
There's a question in the chat too.
Okay. You've dabbled on some answers about this during the discussion, so could you share why you all individually gravitate to earlier stage startups as engineers? Is there something that personally motivates you?
I can start here. I think that for me, a lot of my interest in tech has been less about just like the pure technology and more like what problems can I solve and like what in the world that I live in do I want to see done differently. And my first job out of college, I got to sort of like solve a lot of different interesting problems with like a product manager hat. And then I learned pretty quickly that, oh man, a lot of great ideas fall apart in execution. And so I wanted to go back to my sort of like computer science background and go back to engineering and get really good at that. And to me, the best place to go to really figure out how to turn an idea into reality is a startup because of kind of what we touched on earlier, where you get such a breadth of experience. You learn everything from front-end development, back-end deployment, all of that, including like, what does the customer think about this? So for me, it was sort of the best place I could go to get a world-class kind of education and how to turn an idea into a reality in a way that I couldn't quite see end-to-end happening at other sort of larger, more mature companies.
Yeah, like when I was at Google, I felt like it didn't get anything done, and sometimes we did just sit there or go to lunch for like 4 hours. So I really got frustrated about the startup I was in I had a company, and then I went to Google, and I was just doing things every day, wearing many hats. I went to Google, and we were doing nothing. And then going to jump to the drum deploy, I felt much better because I just like solving problems, working with people that were also solving problems, and everybody was doing different things and being productive. And it was really, I just like being in that environment where things are moving really quickly, or or even sometimes it's even exciting to know like we don't get this done, things are gonna fail because but it did, but when it succeeds because everybody there did it.
For me, it's like it's this feeling of freedom. Like I've worked my way down the corporate ladder several times now, and gone into like early stage startups. And when you get into bigger companies, sometimes you also feel stifled. Like you want to make change, but there's like an entire marketing department, and then there's this department, and then there's legal, and they have their say. And like you just feel like stuck, like you can't move. And usually that's where I end up in an earlier stage startup from a larger, more established company, is when I feel like nothing I'm doing is mattering here. And then you're like, I'm gonna go somewhere where like maybe we fail, maybe we have duct tape together drones, I don't know. But you at least feel like I have some autonomy here. It kind of feels like, you can take a 30-minute drive into Boulder on like Marshall Road, like the back way when 36 is all packed up and whatever. It takes longer to get here, but the drive is more scenic and you're at least moving. To me, even though like the drive to Boulder takes less time to sit on 36, but I'm like bumper to bumper behind somebody, I'd much rather just be moving and feel free. And that's a pretty powerful feeling to me.
Yeah, exactly what everybody has said. It's being able to solve problems and feel like you're actually moving, doing something, rather than sitting there and you work on a project and then it gets canceled, and then you go try to find a new project, and then you figure out that another team is already working on a similar project. So then you go try to find another one, but the director doesn't like that idea. And you spend all this time trying to make a difference and getting kind of shut down. And for me, that was miserable. I hated that. And like no amount of paycheck was worth that to me. And that's how I started gravitating towards startups, is like, you have a vision, I can execute your vision. Okay, let's go do it, and then you actually build something.
Well said. Thank you, panelists. You've been great. Yeah, great. Well, we'll see you all around. And Naz, thank you for joining us from
Thank you so much.
Yeah,
Thanks for accommodating.
Yeah, absolutely.
We need to get that.
Oh, there's a link. Yeah, well,
It's a dead link, actually. It was something I bookmarked, but they've taken down the tool. So now you'll never know.
all right, we'll try.
All right, the other ones.
There's probably another one there.
Yeah, thank you so much for joining. Good to see y'all.
Thank you, everybody.
Yeah.
Cool, thanks for coming out, y'all.
Yeah, have some pizza. Early.
I know.
75.